So my name is Neil Gallus. This is Brad Flanagan, and this podcast has kind of been his dream child.
Yep.
So Brad, why don't you start? Tell us who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Man, so try to live true to the comment that I feel like I'm a real estate professional with a focus on finance. Sounds almost institutional, like collegiate, like, hey, this is my major and this is my minor. But I've always tried to live with a student mindset. And by that meaning never too humble to realize that there's plenty to learn out there. And so I practice what I preach. I try to be receptive to learning new concepts, ideas, perspectives on anything that relates to fiscal health from a business and from a household standpoint. So if you can buy it, invest in it, borrow it, or live in it, I am interested in it.
Yeah. I really like how you put that. And I think it encompasses both of us and how we kind of look at it. I mean, we're mortgage originators by day, which is very finance heavy, but in all of our waking hours, we're investing in other avenues and trying other businesses and just continuing to grow and expand. And just the way you put it really sums it up.
Appreciate that. And I think that's why we are in partnership as branch managers, as sales leaders, as advisors to our clients and to our business partners that refer us. So practicing what we preach, I think, is that added value that doesn't always come from Google when you search for somebody to help you through the process. So with that, what's Neil Gallus about?
Yeah, I where my passion comes from is I was able to get into real estate really young. Very, very early 20s, I became a realtor. Mid 20s, I started a real estate investment company. Now I found my way into the finance side, which is really where I enjoy. Mm-hmm. But the way real estate has changed my life and the life of my family and the legacy I'm building just gives me this passion where I want to share it with others, because everyone thinks it's this thing only the uber rich can do.
Right.
And it's not further from the case. Really, it takes creativity and dedication. And I know when I started flipping houses, I didn't have two nickels to rub together, but we found a way to do it. And so my passion is just taking those people that are interested and building that legacy and changing their lives and helping them get through those first steps.
Yeah.
That's really what brings me excitement.
And sometimes it's like people think that it's this pursuit of money. It's a monetary motivation, which I think is a piece of it, but it's more about the security and the freedom and the ability to choose what the next dedication of time is for, in trying to create, I guess, a life where it's a little bit more enjoyable. I know personally, we get to travel a bunch because real estate is national, and there are different features, benefits, amenities to different types of real estate, or there are different purposes in the use of an investment property or a second home that can generate some revenue, that kind of thing. So that is more the experience side of it for the family to be able to travel, enjoy different places, but still be making a responsible decision financially, because you're either looking at acquiring or taking care of something you own. Just happens to be in a vacation spot. So
there's nothing better than traveling to a home that's already yours.
Yeah.
Just the benefits and the write-offs, and then not just having a vacation property, but really being able to monetize that all at the same time.
Can get scary though. I mean, if it's vacant or there's some value there or risk that somebody might not take as good a care of it as you would want them to. So definitely living life on the edge in some of those instances.
And I like that you chose the word freedom opposed to responsibility, because it's a very big contrast. I might be the most free I've ever been in my life, but I also carry the most responsibility I've ever had to carry.
Sure.
The difference is I have the ability to handle my responsibilities as I see fit, when I want to, where I want to. And it doesn't make it a day on the beach drinking pina coladas, but it just allows you to have that work and joy balance. As long as you're willing to work hard, you can play a little bit more often and hard too. But that laptop's always with you.
It sure is. Yeah, you got to be careful when you start pina coladas, because the phone's still going to ring, and chances are we're going to answer it. You just want to make sure you can remember that conversation.
Yeah, amen to that. Now, you mentioned buying real estate on a more national level. That's something you have more experience than I do. What markets are you in, and what markets do you find the most successful? And I guess, how do you define success with that?
That's a really, really good question. And I do consider some of them still experimental, right? It's as a data junkie or an analyst, it's all about the amount of data you have to analyze. And so I would say I'm between primarily like Nebraska, Colorado, and Arizona. A decent amount of experience in all three of the markets. And it'd be tough to say one's more successful than another. I would say, Nebraska is probably the most corporate or work oriented, because it's not full of vacation property.
We're not really a vacation destination here in Omaha, Nebraska.
I always love when I see like a movie where I think it's Eternal Sunshine and Spotless Mind or something with Jim Carrey, and they're like, we're going to go to the airport and we're going to pick the next flight out, and it happened to be to Omaha, and then I think it happened to be during College World Series or something along those lines. So yes, Nebraska has some of their attractions. I think it's a very nice, wholesome place. I think it's healthy. I think it's insulated more from volatility than places like a Colorado or an Arizona. However, I'm only so risk tolerant. So a place like Arizona, where you have high production corporate national public builders who can put a property up in no time and has very limited interruption to the construction schedule, is something where I would never put the lion's share of my income my assets, just because if a place is going to experience some volatility, they are more likely to experience it quicker. And if we're talking, I always tell my daughter, like, what do you think are the most valuable things there are? And in the sense of monetary value. And then when she finally picks a certain car or diamonds or something like that, I'm like, why are they so valuable? And it's because they're rare. So that's more about valuing yourself and making sure that you create some insulation between yourself and everybody else. I'll get on that in a different topic, but go back to the value and the maintaining the value of your real estate portfolio. The only thing that's going to impact that is supply, right? Supply and demand, inflation, so on and so forth. And I worry that Arizona can pop a bunch of houses up and all of a sudden slow down economic growth from a value standpoint on real estate.
I really liked how you went full circle on that, because at the very end you answered my question that I had on. So let's reconnect those dots and just try to tie that together on the forefront. So when you start off by saying really positive things about the construction schedule in Arizona, it would lead the average person to assume that's a positive thing. But what they're not realizing, and what you alluded to at the very end, is if you're in a market that has the ability to just increase supply drastically, that any economic impact is going to be felt greater.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Thank you for breaking it down. And that's what we had an issue with when we look at the time that defines most people's mindsets, the Great Recession or the housing crisis of '08. It was more about supply and demand, and understanding the economics behind that. and compounded with the fact that there was abuse of the financial system back then, or less regulation that allowed for the mistakes to get made. So,
which I think is a hot topic for everyone right now. It's
Sure is.
something I love to dig into. I wasn't ever in lending until I studied the 2008 financial crisis. That was actually what got me so fascinated about this world. And the reason I took the jump was actually the movie Big Short. Just started to see how these pieces come together and how the financial system is really built. But before we dive down that wormhole, I think there's a lot of really brilliant contrast that we can draw between the Arizona market and the Omaha, Nebraska market.
Yeah.
Because like me personally, I am completely focused in my own backyard, which is Omaha, Nebraska. So we have a flipping company. We do probably about 15 flips a year. I flipped about 50 houses in my career. And then, we hold some rentals as well. We're holding more and more rentals now that we've gotten some momentum. And one of my favorite things about the Omaha market is the stability. And so when I have a call with a potential client and they're asking me about the market, I can tell them, I'm not just telling you this as a salesman that's trying to sell you a loan. I am giving you the exact advice that I am following myself right now in this market. I am putting my money in my mouth as I'm buying a house every month in this climate. And a lot of people are sitting on the sideline. And so it takes a lot of certainty and confidence in the market. It's not exuberance. And just like drawing that contrast between Arizona, it's not just positive metrics, but understanding which positive metrics actually matter.
Right.
Because going back to Arizona, you say, hey, nonstop construction year round with little interruptions, they can put up houses quickly. That all sounds good.
Yeah.
Until you understand that rubber band of supply that can be snapped when there's any sort of slowdown and this huge machine of new construction doesn't stop. And that's when that supply and demand starts to really get out of whack, opposed to Omaha, Nebraska, where we have an enormous supply constriction.
Yes.
And we'll have an enormous supply constriction for the foreseeable future. I mean, no one can forecast out past a decade, but for the next decade, this is the market we're going to have to some extent. And it's always been that way. And it's because our construction time is slower.
It is.
And even though it's getting worse because now we're becoming more of a recognizable metropolitan. And we're having big businesses and tech company come into our already what was a very stable, more of a blue collar, trains, trucking, farming, like that. That's where we started. And that's all very stable and relatively recession proof. And now that was our base. And now we're building on to that, a huge tech foundation. So we're seeing a lot of inflow, which is making our problem worse because we cannot build. We can't build. I can't drive down the street without seeing a new apartment complex go up because we're so far behind.
And that's what makes you kind of think too is what is the future? What are the next evolutions for a market like this? Because in an area where Airbnb or short-term rentals or just rentals in general were maybe more successful or more in demand, now we have a big apartment complex go in, and now all of a sudden you see the slowdown in that. So it's also plays into the diversification and the advisory part of what we do, especially because our comments, our opinions are sought out by other investors or other professionals, not just the average homebuyer consumer. Or primary residence buyer. So it does cause reason to stop and be analytical when you do have so much change going on. The difference is somebody who just sitting on the sidelines for some ancillary or some small reason like, oh, interest rates are high.
Yeah.
Interest rates are higher than they were. They are high relative to the past 10, 15 years, but in the grand scheme of things, there's still a single digit, thank goodness. And there's still great forecasting and appreciation. So just not buying a house that you're going to live in because of the high interest rate is maybe not the best metric to measure.
And that's so true. And I think we should dig into, because that's my favorite line that I try not to eye roll when I hear it. But it always sticks out to me.
Don't even say it.
People go, I'm just waiting for a good deal. What's a good deal?
Oh, I thought you were going to say marry the house and date.
Oh, no. That's the comeback. But
exactly.
Everyone goes, hey, what's a good deal? I need to wait till interest rates are 4%. But lower interest rates doesn't necessarily make a good deal. So I think people need to work harder to put boxes around actually defining what a good deal is. Because if the house is overvalued by $100,000 and you get $25,000 off, you didn't get a good deal.
Right.
And on the flip side, if you wait till you have a 4% interest rate, when we go back to that supply and demand, you were going to see a new enormous uptick in demand. Now we're back in that multiple offer situation where that same house is going $40,000 over.
Yep.
Well, if Omaha, Nebraska is appreciating at 5% a year and you went $40,000 over purchase price, how many years until you've caught up in value?
Exactly.
Right. And so like low interest rate does not equal good deal. And nor does price necessarily, because you can, in the average, realtors know that, but your average consumer might see an overpriced listing and come in low and still be overpaying at the end of the day.
And we were okay with that when the interest rates were low. But if you think about how much that correlated to when it comes to a rate, a percentage of what you're spending, it was astronomically higher than 3%.
Yeah.
And like, I haven't sent out more. I sent an email out today with somebody who got an appraisal $10,000 over the value and over the purchase, $10,000 over the purchase price, and the seller's paying closing costs. So in the terms of interest, that's over a couple of years probably worth of the interest alone that they're paying on that house.
And that's theory, like the way you're breaking that down, I don't think most people think about, but it's essentially like APR.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you have your interest rate on your home, which is the rate that you're borrowing the money at. And then you have your APR. And what APR is when they take your interest rate and all of the other costs associated with purchasing that home, mortgage insurance, points paid, title fees, origination fees, and they roll that number into addition with the interest rate. And that tells you what it actually costs you to borrow the money.
Yep.
What would be shocking is if we had a formula that put how much did you pay over sale price into the APR.
Exactly.
And then now that those deals that were done with the 3% interest rate aren't going to look so low.
Right.
And it's probably going to be a lot more similar to the APR people are getting now. The houses are selling closer to that value at the end of the day. And so that's why this idea of like waiting for a good deal, especially for a primary buyer who's trying to get into the real estate market, the best deal was yesterday.
It was.
The next best thing to yesterday is today. Because when we look at the appreciation of real estate, and we'll start with our predictions on Omaha, Nebraska, then I'll talk about Arizona. So I think it makes a great contrast. They both have their perks, but every house I own is worth more every time I turn around. And when we see a decade of supply constrictions, we're just going to continue to see that. And so, by the time you retire in 20, 30 years, that $200,000 house is worth $400,000. It's just what happens with money. If you go back 20 or 30 years, that $100,000 house in Omaha is now $200,000.
Yep.
And that was 15 years ago. And so if we know that's the direction we're going, whether you got it at 5.5 or 6.5 today matters less and less. It's, did I get it this year or did I put it off 2 years waiting for the right deal in the buyer's market? And now you're just putting yourself behind that 8 ball.
When the cost to do business continues to rise.
That's
so
true too.
I remember when the closing costs were lower than they are today. And that's a real number, right? It can be a real expense that can prevent somebody from getting into the house or not. So mortgage insurance changes, homeowners insurance changes. I have yet to see even if I was to go back to '08, I would buy the house. And if I can say that when we've learned so much and it's taken a long time to pass since '08, I don't know too many people who bought then that wouldn't, if they still held on to a property today, still have seen a decent return.
And they would. In Omaha, Nebraska, I think it's 100% what it's worth now. I know there's some areas in California that took 5-6 years to recover,
Right.
but Omaha, Nebraska, I think it was like 9 months.
Yeah.
And then we had recovered because it's such a strong local market. And that just ties into all this, that you hold it and through the ups and downs. And then in a state like Omaha, Nebraska, there's not a whole lot of downs. And what I think people are waiting for is, when that interest rate gets to 8%, or if it gets to 9%, then the prices are going to come down. And I think that idea is broken, because what they're not considering is it really is just a metric of supply and demand.
Right.
And so what's happened is we've watched interest rates double. And in some scenarios, they're about to be triple.
Mm-hmm.
If you were at a VA loan at 2.5%, well, we're hitting 7.5%, right? And so, I mean, there are scenarios where we've seen interest rates triple in a very short amount of time. And so, yes, there's significantly less buyers in the market, but there are significantly less people selling.
That's very true.
And so because there are so few sellers on the market, there is still an uneven balance between the amount of people that want to buy being more than the amount of houses that can be sold.
True.
And so when if we get to an 8% rate or a 9% rate, there's going to be less buyers, but there's even going to be even less sellers, because the higher that rate goes, if you already own a home,
you're just today's situation.
Yeah, you're more and more disincentivized to move, but that price will still be climbing. And then everything in rates are a cycle. If we go back through history, we go through cycles. 3-4 year cycles are pretty standard. A 10-year cycle is some of the longer ends of those rate cycles that we've seen, like in the 70s and the Volcker era. But when those rates come back down, prices don't come back down. There's now just more buyers in the market. And so you will still see this uneven demand. And that's the thing, because our new construction takes longer, because we have to dig in the winter, we have to have basements, we have unpredictable weather. We were -40 and 100 in a 6-month span. Monday was 100 degrees. Yesterday was a torrential downpour. I mean, all these things affect.
They sure do. And then the floods, and all of a sudden, then you don't have sod, and your houses aren't complete, and it's taken 1-2 years to complete some houses.
Snow in April. How are you getting your sod ready to lay when it's snowing? And so these things have an actual impact on the amount of housing that we can build. And so new construction in our market cannot seem to keep up to add enough to the supply to deliver us that balanced market. And so that's why I say the best time to buy was yesterday.
Sure is.
Because when we look at Omaha, Nebraska, it's only going one direction. Now, you can kind of say the same about Arizona if you want to be a more risk-tolerant investor. Because when we look at the pandemic and Omaha, Nebraska, we appreciated about 12% a year for about 2.5, call it 30 months. There was just very rapid appreciation. And throughout the pandemic and those low interest rates, housing in Omaha, Nebraska increased by 30%.
Yeah.
That's extreme.
Sure.
Under normal market conditions, that should have been closer to like 7 or 9%. Would be more normal of an outcome, right? But we've lost none of it. So even though we're out of those pandemic era rates are climbing, we have not given up a dime of appreciation.
Cool.
Now we flip the script and we look over at Arizona, and the appreciation was so rapid, they were measuring it by the month, where we measure it by the year. And Arizona was going up 3, 4, 5% per 30-day period.
Especially like if you take certain hot areas and focus on those. But still, like you said, the competition is thinner from a selling standpoint. So for some odd reason, we haven't seen that pullback that everybody was expecting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think it's risky, but it's not because I have experienced it firsthand just yet.
And when I talk to my friends in Arizona, they have lost a little bit of value.
Yeah.
But they gained 50% in that same time period.
Right.
And so if you gained 50% and lost 5 to 10% of it, you're still up 40%. And I kind of look at that as I would my stock portfolio. If I got a 15% return in the first 3 quarters of the year, and then in that last quarter, I lost 4%, I still outperform the market by 3%, total 11% return. And so when I look at the Arizona market, if you're a long-term investor, it's different if you're doing flips or short terms, or you have to be able to sell or refinance that money in a certain amount of time.
Right.
Yes, it carries more risk, but I think if you're a long-term investor who's buying properties for, the marathon, I'm not scared of Arizona.
Oh, no, not scared. Like I said, too, I mean, I'm still there and I'm invested there. I'm just saying from a portfolio diversification standpoint, that's where I would say, Nebraska is the more blue chip, safer bond fund.
The Berkshire stock, as you will.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then Colorado is one of those there. I also believe they have a more difficult construction schedule. Then you take it up a notch and get into the mountains. It's the barrier of entry is a little higher, and the skilled trades are more scarce. So there you have some protection, I think, as well, because the supply and demand. And then you take it out to Arizona, and that's like your growth fund. So I think it's important to look at your risk tolerance even when you're talking about real estate, because most of the time it's only a focus in the securities or the equities markets. And it's the same concept. It's money at work, hoping to preserve its cost basis and grow. And then, of course, outpace inflation. But it's one of the few asset classes where it can generate revenue at the same time. So it's like you can get a growth stock that pays a dividend. Not very common in your...
That is, I was going to put this off and drop this nugget later.
Let's do that.
You pulled it out of me. So that is my favorite way to look at real estate, is because someone says, hey, Neil, why do you buy real estate? Because if I look at my net worth and my asset allocation, it is incredibly weighted towards real estate. Mm-hmm. And I just have a little bit in the market. I've played the market. I have a grasp, but I struggle not putting my money to work for the greatest use.
Yeah.
And so that's always my holdback, is because I know what my returns can be. And so let's talk about like what really differentiates buying and holding real estate to buying stock. And you hit the nail on the head. So let's take that. Let's use a $200,000 house. We'll just make an easy example. So if I buy a $200,000 house, which you still can in Omaha, Nebraska, it can be done. Not a lot of states can still say that.
Yeah, right.
So you buy that $200,000 house as an investor, which is one of the many ways to do it. I think we'll get into all the ways you can buy real estate, but for now, you put 25% down. Okay. Let's assume there's no closing costs, because a fairy waved a wand. I don't know. No closing costs. So you're in this house for $50,000. Okay. If I were to take $50,000 and put it into the market, an index fund returning at 8%, I would make $4,000 a year on a $50,000 investment. So, okay. Right. So yeah. That's what I would make $4,000 a year, an 8% return.
Math at face value, because I don't have a calculator.
It took me a minute. Well, 10% would be $5,000.
Yeah.
So 80% of that would be $4,000. So that's how it took me a minute to get there, but I got there. So yeah, it's an 8% return would be $4,000 a year. And let's look at real estate. I can buy that $200,000 house. I put $50,000 down. It's the same $50,000 investment. And here's where people get caught up, is they just look at the cash flow. because they can look at the cash flow and say, whoa, when I do a cash on cash calculation, which cash on cash is how I compare my returns to a stock market return as far as just dollars I'm getting back.
Yeah.
That real estate, it might make $200 a month, and that's $2,400 a year net. And so now we're at a 5% return opposed to the 8% return. And people look at that and go, whoa, well, I'm getting 3% more on the stock, but they're missing the rest of the picture. And that's what the biggest mistake I made when I started investing was actually looking at the cash on cash and only looking at properties where the specific return from a cash flow standpoint outperformed the market.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I realized I wasn't really seeing the whole picture, because going back to that supply and demand, a lot of things are happening as you own that real estate financially that play a big impact. So yes, I'm getting the 5% return from the cash flow.
Yep.
But in Omaha, Nebraska, that property is appreciating at 4 to 5% a year if you do a 40-year historical average, that's where you're going to be sitting. So
that's a big Google search.
And it's a Google search.
Look at,
it's higher.
I go to the houses specifically and look up the prior transactions. I look at what the house was bought for, and I look at what it's sold for more recently or what the current market value is and recalculate that. And even if I factored in, a renovation, it's still outpacing 5-7%, which is going to be nationwide average.
Which what I love about Brad is I just trust the data, and Brad just minds it himself. He makes his own conclusion, which I appreciate. So what people fail to realize is when I put $50,000 in the stock market, I'm getting the appreciation on $50,000.
Yep.
When I put $50,000 into real estate, I'm getting the appreciation on however much real estate that allows me to buy.
Right.
That could be a $500,000 house. That could be a $750,000 house if you can structure it right. But in this scenario, it's a $200,000 house, right? So I'm getting the appreciation not on the 50 grand. I'm getting the appreciation on the $200,000 piece of real estate.
Exactly.
Well, 5% on 200 grand is $10,000. So now my home or my stock portfolio is giving me $4,000 a year. Now we're just 2 of the 4 ways you make money owning real estate. And we have $2,400 a year in cash flow plus 10 grand in depreciation. So we'll call it 12.5. And now we've already tripled what my money would be doing.
We haven't talked about amortization.
We haven't talked about amortization. We haven't talked about tax sheltering. That's right. And so now you take it a step further and you go, wait, someone else is paying off debt that I own. Someone else is taking on that cost for me, which is the idea. Sometimes you got to write your own checks and, pay your own mortgage payments. But ideally, that's what the tenant is doing.
Yep.
And so amortization schedules, the best way to look at it is for the first 10 years, you're wearing boxing gloves and you're the big puffy ones you put on your hands and sock and boppers, right? You're barely putting a dent in that principal.
Right.
But after you get past that 7 to 10 year mark, you really start chunking away. And that's a lesson I actually learned from you when I was young and I didn't get it at first.
Really?
Yeah, because I came to your house and I had just bought my first rental or two and I thought I was, big stuff. And I came over and I talked to you about amortization. He's a lender. He knows what he's doing. He's a smart guy. And he went, yeah, Neil, all my stuff's on 15 years. And it blew my mind because my properties were on 20, 25, and 30 years.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's he doing? Why would he give up this cash flow? He's not making any cash flow because he put this on a 15-year mortgage. No, your payment's higher on a 15-year than it is on a 30. So your cash flow is much less. And in my youth, I was like, cash flow is all that matters. And then what I didn't realize is I was wearing sock and boppers on these mortgages and not making that huge dent that I could be. And when you look at the power of the appreciation and the principal reduction combined, it is so much more significantly impactful to your net worth than the cash flow ever will be. And so if we were just going to assume there wasn't an amortization schedule and you have a 30-year mortgage and you were paying off 3% a year, right? So
Yeah.
call it 100, you're paying out 3.3% a year. We'll just assume that. That means on top of getting that $10,000 of appreciation, you're getting $6,000 a year of principal reduction.
Right.
Especially on your 15 years, you are. On my 30s, I'm not. On those 15s, you are, right? So now you're getting $10,000 from the appreciation, $6,000 from the principal reduction, the $2,500 from the cash flow, and then each rental is worth about a $3,000 a year tax write-off at minimum, right? I'm not a CPA, but that's what I can tell you. There's ways to improve that, which we can talk about as well because we've both done them. But so now I'm not comparing a $2,400 a year cash flowing rental to a $4,000 a year, 50 grand in the stock market return. I'm comparing almost $20,000 of net worth impact to a $4,000 return with the same money.
Right.
So I'm 5xing the impact to my retirement by buying those properties, opposed to putting the money in the market.
Which is not intended to say that the level of work required to put 50 grand into a brokerage account is the same as putting 50 grand into a piece of real estate, because there is a tangible work effort and responsibilities in that. But that's the return, right? You're a small family. You want to teach some work ethic to your kids. You take them with you. I remember showing my kid, or being a very bad example, just going and cutting branches off of trees and stuff. I mean, I don't do that anymore, thank goodness, but you will do that if this is entry level for you,
right?
Because you have to save as much as you get to spend, or as much as you get to profit, because it is building something. I've always looked at the real estate like a fund manager, where that guy is in charge of multiple different investment products within the fund, and he gets his piece from that, which is something to take into account. If you're using a financial advisor, they're getting a management fee, and if they're buying ETFs or mutual funds, there's fees on top of that. So that diminishes the return, and you're not in control. I happen to be a guy who likes to have a little more control. So if I'm going to have an asset, I want to be in full control of it. And that seemed to be more possible in the real estate realm as well. So definitely a lot to it. And nobody expects anyone to, have that quick rattle off of money from all those different aspects. But it speaks to the value you provide when somebody's just looking at buying their first home, or just looking at the option of moving up, and what should they do with the departure residence? Should they retain it? Should they sell it, get their proceeds? Should they use all the proceeds towards the next purchase, or can they allocate that money towards something else that will globally impact their household at a higher rate than if they just went to what I call the drive-through mortgage guys, right. And order take. Yeah, here's my 20%, my Happy Meal. It's too much of a shift and an evolution in this world where we are now what I would say debt managers, which in a world where there's as much debt as there is, it comes at almost the same value, if not greater value, than asset manager.
Oh, well, it's true, because that asset management side is trying to get you an 8% return. And that debt management side, I mean, you can be taking I have a credit card at 29.99%. It just reevaluated it, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have 20, 25, 30% on your debt, you probably shouldn't be putting money in the Roth,
right,
at the end of the day, because you're not going to outpace the debt that way. And there is good debt and bad debt, and that's another conversation. But the debt management piece is so critical. One of my favorite sayings, I like to say, leverage is like fire. It's what separates the man from the monkey. but it'll also burn your house down. Right. And so like there is this level of, controlled risk on business leverage, and business debt can be very healthy and very profitable, but consumer debt's never, because there is no benefit to $20,000 of credit card debt. There is no benefit. And so we see it all the time where it's, hey, you could put down an extra 15% on the home, an extra $40,000 it may be, and drop your payment $300-400. Or you could take that and pay off that vehicle at a 12% interest rate and the $15,000 of credit card debt at a 30% interest rate, and drop your monthly cash output by triple that. And I think that's where you really excel.
Well, and then it's the hardest part is to maintain the discipline as to what to do with that come up, with that improvement in your household budget. Is if the intention is just to spend it frivolously or go on more vacations, then no, it's not probably the best long-term decision. But if I roll in somebody's 0% car loan because they're paying 3-4 times what they would be if that debt was mortgage debt, yes, you're losing that zero cost interest over here, but the ability to roll that overage that you now have, that free cash flow that you have because you don't owe the debt that has a higher servicing cost, roll that into the principal reductions. The compound effect on the interest savings is so great that they end up in a better position. So now the evaluation is, do I roll that cash flow into eliminating principal, or do I roll it into an investment that generates returns?
Yeah. So let's rebreak that down too. Yes. Like you're saying, if I could put down less on my home and pay off $50,000 of other debt, I would have an increased savings to my monthly cash output. And then you could take it one step further and now take that savings that you would have paid if you had put 20% down, because you wouldn't have paid off that debt, and take those savings and accelerate the debt payoff on that long-term debt. And so now not only have you gotten rid of that debt, but you've turned a 30-year mortgage into a 22-year mortgage, a 20-year mortgage easily. And so that's the I don't want to call it a manipulation, but the understanding how to move the money correctly. And you can agree with me or disagree, but I see it almost as much on the other side when I have people that are very, very debt adverse. They actually put themselves in the same trap. It just looks different. I had to tell a guy to beg him not to pay off his car that was at a 2% interest rate, because you could go put that money in treasury bills at a 5% interest rate. When inflation is higher than the interest rate on your debt, and you can guarantee a return that outperforms the cost of that debt. I mean, really, he could have paid off that car. It would have felt great, but he would have a worse return overall.
It would just, I sometimes I do lean towards the payoff of vehicles. So I would have to be in that position to really feel like I could make a decision, I guess, as to what my opinion was, or formulate my opinion. Because again, the car debt can hinder the ability to do more just because it's so expensive these days, and it's short term. So of course, 30 grand equals $700 a month, when 30 grand on a mortgage equals what? $180, $200 a month, call it. That's a free cash flow of $500. It's just a matter of what are we going to do with that $500 when we free it up. If he could pay it off, have more cash flow, and put that investment into something that was going to yield a return, we just have to. I always have to use the calculator.
I can see that. That's a fair point. That's a really polite way of saying you disagree.
Well, it's just more about analyzing. I don't think there's a right or wrong in any instance. It's what's right for that person. And it's why when I sit down, my job is to give you options, not to give you opinions. If you don't know, then you can't make the most informed decision. I sat down with a couple and I proposed the option of just having one of them on the loan because, as you know, there's income limitations and reasons, maybe from a credit scoring standpoint, that one borrower, if they qualify by themselves, may yield better terms than both. He was like, absolutely not. I would rather not buy the house than not be on the debt for the house. Personal opinion. And I can empathize with that, or I can sympathize with that, whatever the case may be. I said, perfect. The good news is it's your decision. The worst thing that I can do is not share something with you that you find out at the end when you can't make a change that I didn't share it and you say you wish I would have. I'm glad you did. No, thank you is much better than I wish you would have, because then I failed. It's like me not giving my kid the option to participate in a sport or a hobby that may ultimately lead to their success or their ultimate happiness. So try everything, or at least understand and know what it is. And from there, make the most informed decision. So we've hopefully knowledge dropped and had some, good banter back and forth of some probably pretty highly technical areas of investment, finance, real estate. We didn't even get into crypto. If I got into crypto with this guy, we'd be in real trouble. So hopefully if you enjoyed what you've been hearing, subscribe, like, comment, shoot us an email, text, all of the technology ways to get in touch these days. We'd love to make sure we're putting out content that is relevant for
it's valuable.
Everyone and anyone who's interested in what we do. So
yeah.
Anything we left out?
I think we could go on for hours.
Man, we sure will. I'm sure we won't call it a night.
I think we're better off having 10 episodes than 1 2-hour podcast.
Who knows? This will be pieced out into a couple different pieces.
You'll have to track the data.
Let's go
For us.
Yeah.
So, all right, guys.
Thanks.
Sounding off.
Have a great one.